Hello, everybody, and welcome to edition 192. Who would have thought we'd got 192 under our belt? But anyway, those of you watching on video will note that we've got a guest. Paul Ainsworth is with us. Good morning, Paul.
Morning.
Morning. Great to have you. Been trying to get you for a while, so it's great to have you. And Stan, here we are. We've missed you for the last 2 weeks. Well, we missed a little bit of you. Kendra Allen did a magnificent job, Stan.
Yeah,
Really,
I
really,
understand. I
really good
understand
job.
viewing figures shut up. I understand all this, Frank.
Anyway, you've enjoyed a few weeks in the sun.
Yeah, wonderful cruise around the Greek islands. So starting at Athens and then finishing up, not in a Greek island, but finishing up in Venice.
Wow.
So yesterday at this time, I was still in Venice. It must feel a bit strange. Also, I've not had any opportunity to look at the news or follow the election progress. And I think a lot of that's good.
Yeah. Well, while you've been away, England have won the Euros. They.
I know there's another game coming up, Frank. So I don't know who they're playing, but I know they're playing.
Anyway, okay, so welcome back. Paul, thank you for joining us. Do you want to just give us a little introduction so that colleagues who've not met you before or haven't read one of your books know who you are?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Frank. Thanks for having me. And I feel under a little bit of pressure, Stan. You know, if the numbers decrease this week, but you can blame it all on me. But it's not you.
He will. He will, Paul. Don't worry.
So I'm education.
Sorry, Paul, but the thing that Kendra was right with was I'm not that minded about
Neither am I.
That's not the impression they gave. I was expecting an ultra competitive person with bar charts in the background, knowing episode 189, the viewing figures were X.
Definitely not me.
So, Paul, what do you do?
So I'm an education director for Infinity Academies Trust, which is a 10 primary school MAT in Lincolnshire. Been with it for almost 5 years. It's my fourth multi-academy trust I've worked with after being a secondary school head. I write books. So my latest one is No Silver Bullets, Heart and Soul of School Improvement. Have the massive privilege of doing a range of training. So worked with you at Forum, Frank, to train the education directors of tomorrow. And I'm currently working with Lincolnshire Lead Teaching School Alliance to run a program for executive head teachers. So I'm a really privileged person to kind of do the job and meet the people that I do.
Well, we're privileged to have you today, so thank you for joining us. Right, well, just under a week away till the general election. That's been going on while you've been away, Stan.
Again.
And also,
so
no, well, and I caught a little bit of the American presidential debate last night. Dear. Somebody said to Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer, basically, is this the best that we can do? Which I thought was a bit unfair, to be honest. But actually, I thought it might be a fair comment of the two presidential candidates. But anyway, I'm not sure if you're going to cover that, Paul. I don't want to take the wind out of your sails. But let's go to Stan first, to what's caught our eye this week. So what's caught yours, Stan?
Well, something very different and for once, not educational to begin with, but I'm sure we can drag it into the educational forum. And that's hotel and cruise ship mirrors. These great big magnifying mirrors that show you every blemish, every scar, your age, the wrinkles, anything else you might want to spot on your face that you haven't seen for quite some time. And it's really quite scary. And it made me think about the fact that normally my mirror at home doesn't reflect all that. And I think possibly my eyesight, and I think nature's got a way of sort of affecting our eyesight as we get older, so we don't see all those blemishes quite as clearly. And I'm worried now that if somebody, I go in and get my new glasses and I'm super focused, that's okay. But if my wife is, 44 years of marriage might go down the drain if she sees the blemishes, holes, and everything else that's wrong with me.
No,
so
I
warning
think
for ophthalmists to just keep that soft edge to the focus, please.
Yeah. It's funny because as you were talking, because you mentioned this before the chat, it was about when you go to a hotel mirror, and it's not one of those that doesn't steam up. You know, so you've had your shower and everything, and it's all steamed up. Actually, that feels a little bit like where I felt as a school leader at times. You know, if only you could get through the mist. You know, and actually, I don't know about you, but I tend not to get a towel and do that to the whole of the mirror. I tend to just sort of like do a little bit on the side, enough to have a shave and whatever. You know, so in a way, I'm sort of a bit like that's how I view, in some respects, what school leadership is like. You're focusing in on a small area of it, but elsewhere, there's all this other stuff going on, which you can't really see very well. You know it's going on, but you can't really see it, you know, as clearly as you can the bit that you're focusing in on. And it may well be that that's the bit, we were talking before the chat, that somebody from outside can actually start looking at for you, you know.
And I think that's almost part of, you know, the bit of work that I do is, you know, try and help head teachers with that. And there'll be some head teachers that when I visit, they are having that over magnified view, you know, and they can see every little thing that's wrong with their school. And with those colleagues, I'm spending time saying, yeah, but this is great. You know, if you're bothering about that aspect, you know, that shows what a great job you're doing. If we're into that micro detail, I also kind of, you know, really conscious, you know, in my role of, you know, going and visiting different schools and giving advice is almost not give too much, you know, not say too much. You know, there's almost that magic of what you don't say, isn't there? You can walk it, you know, you've got a brand new head teacher in post in a really struggling school. They don't need you to tell everything that's wrong with that school.
Yes.
You know, let's, you know, try and pick out 2 or 3 things that we're going to work on over the next few weeks, work on with your staff. But yeah, it's a real danger, isn't it, in kind of having too sharp a lens at times on everything.
Yeah, sometimes I used to say to new heads, you know, if you want to make some changes, change some little things first, just little tweaks, so that your new staff know that you will make change, but don't try and do the great big almighty change on day one. Just take it all in first and breathe it in. And you know, I used to be able to say you've got as much time as you want, but sort of Ofsted clock changed that a little bit.
Yeah, I wrote a piece for Forum Strategy a few weeks ago, which was really trying to focus in on sort of big picture stuff. I think I was taken by sometimes the changes that you make, if you're looking for very quick returns on them, may not be the right changes to make. You know, and I referenced children's centres, the IFS report on children's centres, which basically, as they were just about to get into full flow, you know, the government decided to take the funding away, you know, and now, sort of 15 years later, everybody's saying, well, they were really successful, you know, and I think an experienced advisor, inspector, you know, can see through stuff and encourage you to take a slightly longer view over stuff than perhaps somebody who's, you know, a new head teacher wanting to rightly change the world, you know, wanting to make a massive difference and to do it really quickly.
I think that part of that's because there's a pressure, isn't there? That it shouldn't be there. There's a pressure to change. You know, you're the new head, you've got to make everything better straight away. And you need a system where you say, right, these things will do. They're not how I want them to be, but for the moment, they'll do. So we'll park those here. These are things that are good, and we'll look at making them even better another time. And these are things that really need some attention now. And that's where you should be aiming your focus, and be confident enough to say, it's not right over there, it's not perfect, but I can at least leave that ticking over. Otherwise, you spread thin all over the place and you get nothing really done.
I thought the really exciting thing I heard about the short star centres on something I listened to last week was that wasn't in the manifesto, was it?
No.
It wasn't in the manifesto. It came, I think, in the first year of government that was developed.
Yes.
So, you know, one of the things that you'll have missed, Stan, over the last few weeks is a lot of hand wringing about there's not enough things in the manifesto about education, or not enough detail. And, you know, is this going to be a focus? Well, let's maybe hope that whichever parties gets in, they've maybe got something up their sleeves like Short Start Centres, which I was talking to the head teacher this morning about. Oh, that parent would have been so helped by a Short Start Centre. So maybe let's be optimistic that
Yeah,
something's there.
It did suggest, though, didn't it? It did reference, is it 3,000 early years centres or in which were going to be located in primary schools. It didn't get into the detail of how that was going to be funded, but the issue is, as was referenced today, that there is the number of children requiring primary places is reducing significantly. So there is potentially spare capacity. So it may be that at least there isn't a building program required to make this happen. But Stan, the way you were talking, it made me feel as though I was listening to the Labour Party leader. These are the things that we can do now.
Yeah,
We're not
these
going to
are
be
things we
over
can afford to
ambitious.
do. Yeah,
We're in a bit of a mess, but this is what we're going to do first. And I know we've got some bigger projects, down the line, but let's just get in and get our feet under the table. Yeah,
It's that thing about getting momentum, isn't it? As a leader, kind of you need to be seen by people to be successful and making positive change. So try and do, those quick wins, or look, we can
yeah,
work on this together. Let's form the team. Let's get some success. Let's do that. And now build on the next thing, rather than, as you said, Stan, you don't do that massive thing early on, do you? Because
no,
that you run the risk of losing people on day one, and then
yeah,
yeah, yeah. And
yeah.
also
Trying,
working
trying
your
to
way into the
rebuild that.
relationships.
Yeah, trying to rebuild those relationships. Then you think back in my time as an advisor, the number of times trying to fix a relationship between a new head and an existing staff,
Yeah.
and you think, Just stop."
But
Just
that relationship also, I mean, I never went for a job. I had two headships, but in both of them, the deputy didn't apply for the job. But
mm,
the thought of being, that relationship, where you're a new head and the deputy was unsuccessful and feels aggrieved,
mm,
that is a really tricky sort of relationship to work through.
in my first deputy headship, there were 3 internal candidates.
yeah,
We got to the second day, and there was 4 of us and 3 internal candidates. And I turned up for the interview and thought, well, it's not mine. I
Yeah,
don't even know why I'm here. I travelled down from Leeds to Leicestershire and thought, well, there's no point. I've not slept. My little boys kept me awake all night. I've got no chance. This is day 2, and just kind of said it as it was.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so
yeah.
but yeah, that was interesting. 3 internals to then work with, who are my assistant heads.
yeah. In my headship, there was 7 at interview. 6 of them were from Lancashire. One with a history of being in the school whose mother was a governor. Me from outside, and I just, like you, Paul, I just thought, well,
Yeah.
somebody said, "How's it going?" I said, "Well, I think I've just met the new head." I actually think in interviews, when you get to that point where you just think, "Well, I've nothing to lose. I might as
No.
well just say
Well,
it how I feel
you end up
and
being
crack on
yourself,
from
don't you?
there." I
You
think
think,
that's
oh
some
well,
people actually.
because it is a blind date
Mm,
interviews. Every interview, mostly, apart from those where you've got an internal, but mostly where you're an external candidate, it's a bit of a blind date. And I'm surprised more candidates don't just say, halfway through it, looks, folks, I really don't think this is for me. I think that would be really helpful if you're feeling uncertain at that stage. But everybody feels as though they've got to keep in the race, and then at the end, I heard one last week where somebody said, are you still at, down to 2? Are you still a candidate who wants this post? And they said no.
I got asked a couple about 18 months ago. It got down to 2, me and an internal. Do you think this is a fair process?
Wow.
And my response was, well, how can it be fair? You've known this gentleman for 10 years. You met me yesterday. How can it be a fair process? You're asking us to do a presentation on an
Yeah.
improvement plan that the other guy's written. How can it be a fair process?
I know.
Like, what else can you answer in that
yeah.
situation?
Yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I was. This was for my deputy headship. There was a guy who I was working at another school with, so we were both in one school, both applying for a deputy headship. And his feedback was that it was the best interview they'd ever seen, and if they could have filmed it, they would have shown it as a training interview on how to go through an interview. So he said, "So why didn't I get the job?"
Oh dear. Hey, this all started from a cruise ship mirror or
Mirror,
hotel
yeah,
mirror. Paul, what's caught your eye this week?
The thing that I've been really intrigued by in the last couple of weeks, so I went to a comprehensive school. There's one school in the town. It was the comp, and everyone went there. And I'm really intrigued by three of the high people in the Labour Party: Angela Rayner, Bridget Phillipson, Rachel Reeves, all comprehensive school educated. And I think this is probably going to be the first time, isn't it, in our political history that people have come from comprehensive schools. Now, I know Theresa May was state-educated grammar school, wasn't she? And I think John Major was as well. But I think this is really interesting that we're going to have people that have been through that comprehensive school system and in different ways. A few weeks ago, you talked about the fantastic interview of Angela Rayner and her background, and a couple of interviews I've listened to on Leading with Bridget Phillipson and Rachel Reeves. I just think it's fascinating that the view that they're going to have in cabinet about what it's like being a 14-year-old in a comprehensive school. I think it's Rachel Reeves talks about the thing that encouraged her to go into politics was in her sixth form, they didn't have textbooks and they didn't have a common room. And she'd look at children in the local private school who had all those things. And it was, no, I want to get involved because I want to make sure we've got textbooks in our sixth form and we've got a space to study because we haven't got a space at home. I just think that is absolutely fascinating and almost a step change. This generation of politicians.
I've met Bridget twice. I've met Angela twice. I had actually Angela about 7 years ago. I was invited down to the Houses of Parliament by the Co-op Party to speak to Co-op and Labour MPs and peers. I didn't realise, that they were wanting sort of like an hour of me just talking about cooperative education. But I was really struck by Angela at the time. I think it was she was one of these rising stars, and everybody realised, you could see it, the reaction of people because she didn't arrive on time. But it's interesting with Bridget, who I've met twice, 2 or 3 times now. So I think again, the last time I spoke to her was in Blackpool in late December, mid-December, and I was really struck by that she was definitely in listening mode. She was not going to be led into a promise at that stage. It was really interesting how she didn't want to come with a proposal to sound it out. It was really just to understand, what is life like amongst secondary schools in Blackpool, and gave as much time to the children listening to what they were saying as they did to the CEOs and to the head teachers, which, I thought, I think you're probably, I'm not sure what the detail is going to be, but I was really struck by, she was quite not within herself. That was it. She was not prone to this. She was not somebody who was going to sort of bite back and regret it, so I think she's going to be sort of quite considered, and in a way we probably do need a little bit of people feeling valued again, the profession feeling as though, there's a level of respect that we have for you and we want to work with you. I hope that's what we get. I'm sure that was the impression she gave me anyway. Anyway, there's something else, was there, Paul, as well? Did you have two?
Oh yeah, so my random thing was, I don't know if Stan won't have, but Frank, you probably watched the England football match, and straight after the England football match, there was a kind of promotional campaign for an anti-racism. I think it's not. I think the phrase is not in my shirt, sponsored by one of the big phone companies. And then I realised what the music was playing underneath, and it was a single that was released 44 years ago yesterday. Love Will Tear Us Apart by Joy Division, one of my favourite songs of all time. And those people who know me know that I go on about Joy Division all the time. Maybe give a plug to the stage play that's in Manchester in November, No Dawn Fades by Brian Gormley, which is amazing, worth a watch for you guys if you're up there.
Right, yeah.
But I'm not quite sure about the song. Love Will Tear Us Apart as an anti-racism song. Kind of, we could have Gigs Will Tear Us Apart, Stan, or Sharpie Will Tear Us Apart. But it wasn't, I didn't know if A, it quite fitted. Love Will Bring Us Together maybe would be better. And B, I'm never sure about my favourite songs being used for campaigns or adverts.
Yeah.
So that was my other thing, and I wouldn't have noticed because I almost walked out of the room, and then I just kind of caught the song underneath and thought, oh, that's the Wool Terrace Bar. I recognise
Yeah.
that. So maybe there's loads
Let's
of
work
people out there
together.
that will attract them to. Sorry,
Let's
Sam.
work together from an earlier era might have been a better choice.
Yeah. I think, yeah, it was interesting. Did you see Channel 4 last night, Paul? Did you see the visit to Clacton? And, as you were talking, I suppose in a sense, it's not directly related to the music, but what I heard and what I saw was absolutely some of the worst behavior, the worst language about others. It was shocking, Stan, if you didn't see it.
Uh, as I
Really.
have not seen anything.
Well, one of the things that it's a really heavy dose of reality, wasn't it? You know,
I, I think that's there though, Frank. Under it's not far under the surface. I go to a local pub probably twice a month, and that kind of language and that kind of
mm,
thought is there. I can hear it being sort of spoken around the pub, mainly by men in their 60s and
yes, yeah,
70s, I'd say. But it's I can understand why a party who want to get lots of votes might see that as an attractive way forward. I'm just surprised, this may have happened. I don't know. Has nobody brought the death penalty back yet? Because that's
Oh no, well, there was
it's
that
time yet.
recording was that anybody in a boat should be shot. I mean, basically, it was absolutely ridiculous what they were saying. But it's funny. Somebody said, is this a reflection of the education that these people have had? Is it a reflection of a society that doesn't work hard enough to ensure that there's a place for everybody, to exist?
But
So
Frank, you can. There's a book. I'm sure you know of it if you've not read it. The Ragged Trousered Philanthropist. And if you read that book, and that book was written at a time when people didn't read, it was actually written to be read as a story to people. And in there, which it must be around about the early 1900s, I think it's set, they're blaming immigration for them not having jobs.
mm,
And the guy who leads the story is trying to explain that you just the rich are making you want to blame somebody for
yeah,
your ills, and whoever they can manage to get you to aim your anger at, that helps them because you're no longer angry at them.
mm,
And it's a difficult book to read because it goes because it's meant to be a tale told kind of thing, so it's not easy to plow through. But I would recommend anybody who wants to think about the way societies not builds prejudice, but builds anger at other groups in order to satisfy the fact that that we're not where we want to be, so it
mm,
must be somebody else's fault. It can't possibly be my fault.
It
yeah,
was it was really sad, wasn't it? Listening to that kind of yesterday, and just kind of gives you a bit of a bit of despair in your stomach, doesn't it? And then you maybe have to go back and look at the crowds at the football match.
yes,
Kind of last Tuesday. If we looked at those crowds in kind of 1982, 1979, it'd be very different from the crowd that's there today,
yeah,
which is truly representative of our country.
yeah,
Mm.
Both genders. Kind of that full representation that we wouldn't have seen in the past. So whilst yesterday was so depressing, and listening to it on Radio 4 this morning, and kind of it being repeated and reviewed, it has moved forwards. And we go into primary schools, don't we, and we see the kind of books that are being read to children, the kind of ones that tackle
mm,
sexuality and that kind of thing, that's being done really sensitively by our amazing primary school teachers and head teachers. So there is, whilst yesterday dark, really dark, depressing, come into a primary school and you kind of see
yeah.
a
Your
optimistic
your
view of
heart
the
is
world.
lifted. Yeah, I mean, it also highlighted, what good journalism looks like,
Mm.
and why, I always feel now, that if I have to watch a news item, I watch Channel 4 News as opposed to BBC, which I was always an addict to BBC News. But in a way, I I, I want. I mean, in a way, as Stan said, that is there in the pub, but actually it's sort of hidden to some extent. But here, bringing it to the attention of everybody or a lot of people is really good journalism.
The thing for me is, and this was following some research we did in Burnley after the Burnley riots, is how are we dealing with it? And because one of the risks is, and what we found was, we were basically with younger children, the highest racial incidents were in reception, where children say what they think, and you are different to me, therefore I'm. And what we tended to be doing was saying, no, you shouldn't think that, and you shouldn't say that. Not, we need to understand it. So what was happening is that we were sort of suppressing racist views through school. But by the time these children got to be 14 and 15, actually the peer group pressure was much stronger than the school's pressure.
Mm.
So it changed their attitudes that had never been sorted, because we never talked about understanding it. We just talked about, we don't say things like that, we don't use that language. And I still think there's not enough saying, well, let's unpick that. Why do you think that person's different? What is it about?
I agree. Stan,
I might be different now. I've not looked at that in schools
but
years.
my granddaughter is in year 7, so she had to do a presentation to sum up her little course that she'd been on the Second Crusade. Now, I've never ever studied the Second Crusade. All right, I had no idea what the Second Crusade really was, so I sort of did a little bit of digging around. And you think, God, this is so relevant, isn't it, to what's going on in that part of the world and the impact of religion in the Second Crusade and what's happening now. How you as a teacher could connect all of that together to have a better understanding about, it's not just today, folks, but this is going back way centuries, because these things have not been spoken about and connected for people, so they sit within their tribe or their religion or their group, and that's the way they see it. Long may that continue. So it's really interesting you should say that, because even though she'd studied this topic, which I think is highly relevant to what's happening, some of the major conflict in the world at the moment, the teacher's not connected it. So the teacher's seen the Second Crusade as itself as the most important element that we get through, as opposed to using it as a vehicle to understanding the world now.
Yeah.
But that takes real courage, doesn't it, on behalf of teachers? It's a lot easier, isn't it, to teach about the past,
something long ago.
To try and link it to that takes real courage and real skill and real empathy, doesn't it? And and that worry of saying the wrong thing, because that's the other thing. And I think you've spoken about this before about the kind of role of parents. There's a lot of teachers and head teachers that are really worried about saying the wrong thing, because that becomes a parental complaint, and before you know it, you've wasted 2 months in a process that's going to go to your governors and your trustees about somebody just trying to do the right thing in the classroom.
But it's interesting because a few months ago, when the Houthis were shooting American vessels and European vessels, a different teacher actually explained to the class about, because I'd mentioned it in the car on the way to school about the Houthis, and Eleanor immediately was able to connect it all together. And it wasn't just about, well, they're fighting, they're shooting but actually the teacher was taking it right back, into imperialism and all this sort of stuff, and resentment and stuff like that. So it made sense, and actually going back to the point you were making, Stan, unless you actually, if you try and avoid it, you end up just suppressing
you don't say it.
Yeah.
It was almost repressing the language. You don't use those words. You don't use that language. We don't say those things. And instead of like you say, unpicking it and understanding it. And so there's a word I don't like that we used in the report, which was about tolerance. I don't like the idea of tolerance. I prefer understanding, because tolerance suggests that at some point there's intolerance. So I prefer understanding, so that instead of saying we're tolerant of other faiths and other religions, we actually understand that people have other faiths and which are, in their view, as valid as the views we hold. And I think that's a much stronger way of going forward than we put up with these people.
Yeah, yeah,
I was Frank, just last thing, I was
yeah, yeah.
reading some stuff when I was at primary school. I found some old books that I had at primary school, some old history books, where almost inevitably it describes like the Captain Cooks and those explorers. The people on the indigenous people of the island are always referred to as savages.
Right.
They're savage. There's no, the Incas, with a great civilization, savages.
Yeah,
I just,
yeah,
and that's, I mean, to be fair, that's what, well, I'm older than you, so not Frank. Frank's much older than me, but that was the education that we grew up with in primary. That the sort of imperialist story of the empire and helping these savages to become civilized is what we
yeah,
were put in our brains.
Yeah, I walk into schools at the moment, and there's a number of my schools this term doing the Mayans, who was group people that I'd met, were not part of my educational background whatsoever. And I think the first time I saw that project about 5 years ago, I was, what's that?
What's that? Yeah,
about? And that is, how our curriculum has changed, isn't it? For
Yeah.
people looking at different lens, different things.
yeah. Well, what's caught my eye this week? I I was contacted late last night to comment on John Cole's article in the Schools Week, where he comes up with a number of proposals about Ofsted, including bigger teams, longer inspections, I think for secondaries and whatever. That was the point I was going to raise, but I'm not going to raise it now, folks, because actually I do think it's about quality evidence is what you need. You get quality evidence when you get quality inspectors. And, at the end of the day, a school is as good as its teachers. Ofsted's as good as its inspectors. And the problems that Ofsted have got relate to quality of inspectors, and there isn't enough of them who are good enough, to be honest. And I was a great fan and I introduced the reason Stan and I met is that we had a year-long secondment with Ofsted, a year-long, full on. In that year, I think we were better inspectors because of the full focus of our work, on that. We weren't running back to school, having to, for Thursday, Friday, and then coming back out to do something. It was a totally focused training program to make us into, I think, better, decent inspectors. But the thing, so I don't agree with some of the stuff that John Coles is saying. But the point I wanted to make is that one of the schools that I'm a trustee for had an ungraded inspection this week, and in it there was the inspectors have got a choice. They can either say, you are good, but we're going to come back in 1 or 2 years, 3 or 4 years, or whatever it may be. So there's a number of options they've got, and I'm thinking, well, hang on a minute, that's sort of crystal ball gazing, really, isn't it? You've said the school's good. That's what they said. It's a good school. It's still a good school. So you don't know whether tomorrow the head teacher's going to leave. You don't know whether the trust is going to move to a different trust and the whole situation could change. We can't get into crystal ball gazing on inspection. All we've got is the evidence that we've gathered at the time that allows us to make a judgment on what we saw now. We can't have crystal ball gazing because who knows? So this idea that they're able to say, oh, well, we're going to sort of come back. We're going to sort of suggest that you come back in 1 or 2 years. Well, if you're saying that and you think that, then this isn't a good school. If you think that they can't preserve the good for that period of time, don't call it good. But what they found is enough to make it good. And it makes me feel as though another school that I'm supporting at the moment, where outstanding schools that drop to good, well, surely they should have a visit within 1 or 2 years because they're in decline. They've gone from outstanding to good, whereas a school that's good and stays good.
I had a very recent inspection where the letter was the more positive one, and I got asked by the inspector, are you fighting for the good, potentially better? And it was kind of,
What?
no, no, no. It's kind of, it's a small school. It's doing an amazing job. I don't know if a member of staff might leave. Don't know if the head teacher will leave. I don't, I don't want you coming back in 12 months. It's, we're happy, kind of leave the building, walk away, and we'll carry on providing a great deal for the children. That's fine. I don't need you back. Head teacher does a sigh of relief, thinking, thank you, Paul.
Yeah. And also the thing Stan would say, go away and we'll start doing all the innovative work now that you've come, that you've come and gone.
I wish I had money for the number of schools that said that to me when I was an advisor. Yeah, we're going to do all that, but not till Ofsted have been, and then we'll start on the new stuff, the exciting stuff. It gives us 4 years to get it in and running. You just think, how sad is that?
Well, again, I'm a bit of an optimistic person. I've certainly had a couple of visits recently where people have been understanding of, you've made the change. It's not embedded yet, but we can see you had to make the change, and we're going to go with you on that. And I think so. There are, whilst Frank, there might be, not every inspector is great.
Yeah.
There are some really decent ones out there who are totally getting it and saying you've exactly on the money with where you want to improve the school. Your improvement plan is exactly on the money. That's fine with us. We'll go with you on that, and that's a bit of a relief, to be honest.
I agree. I've always said that the system would actually just fall apart if there weren't some decent inspectors out there. But
I do think that element, and my view on this, Frank, I think this is what Ofsted should be doing, is to be saying, yeah, we've looked at your school, we agree with you the things that need addressing, we've seen what your plans are to do it, we've seen that you're making progress with them, we think those are the right things you're doing, big tick in the box, off you go. The only danger is, well, you've not seen the area that we think is lacking. So we have some difficulty in your ability to self-evaluate. Then that's a school that's in trouble and needs some additional support. But if the school's not perfect, but everything it's doing is going in the right direction, and the actions that they're taking are the right actions, then it doesn't need a one-word judgment. It just needs to be told to carry on.
Yeah, I agree. The number of schools that are good or better is rising under this new chief inspector. So we're in effect getting to the point where we've got the standard. You've met the standard. The vast majority of schools are meeting the standard. We really do need to focus and support, not just inspect, the schools that are struggling to get to that standard, because the reasons for that are not straightforward, and some of those reasons are very much to do with, austerity, teacher supply, head teacher supply, all of this sort of stuff is affecting those. So we need to sort of focus a lot more on those without just using it as a hammer to hit the school with, as opposed to just getting up and putting our arms around them and just saying, we all want the same thing. You want it, we want it. What can we do together? Not just continue to inspect it,
Well, politically, they've attached good and outstanding, haven't they, into one band anyway. But nobody politically talks about the number of outstanding schools, mainly because the numbers dropped significantly and it wouldn't look good. And so if you politically talk about the potential of good and outstanding schools, you might as well have that as one grade. There's no point in separating them. You can do that in the text. And I still go back to that comment. I don't know if it was Ofsted who made the comment that if we didn't put the one-word judgment in, people might misread the report and think a school's better. Then
they'd have to read the bloody report.
Right? If it's impossible to tell from reading two sides of A4 whether a school's good or not, then it's really poorly written.
No. Paul, you were going to say something, and then we'll finish.
I just kind of said, in my area, the schools that find this inspection framework the hardest are the small village schools.
Yeah.
If you've got, 3 teachers, one of them's a teaching head, it's so hard for them. The expectation of curriculum planning and all those things, and that. Those, in some ways, it's those little schools in the rural areas that are kind of the glue that sticks it together, aren't they? It's, you kind of 1 form, 2 form entry primary school in a town, or your big secondary school, that's got the capacity, hasn't it? But all those little schools that we've got all over the country, that means children can walk to school, and aren't having to get bussed around and think of the environment and all that kind of thing. But yeah, those are the ones that I think need that arm around them as much as anything, Frank. And we'll have kind of worked with amazing heads in like little rural places, won't we, over our careers?
Yeah. Yes.
And my favourite was, and I've spoken about this before, when I was an advisor, there were 38 children in the school, head and a teacher, basically. And when self-evaluation came, when the SEF came, I went to see the school, and this was a head who'd been a head a long time, didn't really see the excitement of doing a self-evaluation on this small school. So she said, well, what I've done is I borrowed my husband's SEF and we've adapted it. So I said, all right, let me see, where'd your husband teach? In a comprehensive. She tried to rewrite a large comprehensive SEF for a 38 pupil school. And it was just so sad when you could just say, look, just have some headings and say, this is what we do. This is how we work this.
Well, it's a very long Frankistan chat this week, so we're nearly 50 minutes, Stan.
Oh dear.
So, but thank you, Paul, for joining us. I think we've covered quite a lot of ground here. So I hope people have stuck with us and have enjoyed the chat. And next week, Stan, it's the day after the general election. And the guest that we were due to have next week has let us down because they're going on the Channel 4 general election programme. So it's going to be just you and me next week, bleary-eyed as we consider the impact of the general election on education. So until then, thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Paul. Really enjoyed the chat.
Yeah, nice to have you back as well, believe it or not, Stan. Anyway, so see you all next week. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.